Should music and politics mix? Has it always mixed? Is music inherently political? Is it inherently left-wing? Does it have to move you to be any good, and can people only be moved by politics? These questions have been around a lot in recent days, as we've had this time of year again, it's Glastonbury. And as is customary with Glastonbury, there's always some kind of political statement. This year, things feel a little bit different. There have been huge stories about artists making statements, making lyrics, making confrontation with their songs, which some people hate, some people love it. But what does it mean for art? What does it mean for music? What does it mean for politics? Well, it's time to find out. This is Footsteps in Utopia. Hello and welcome to Footsteps in Utopia, the new arts and philosophy podcast from Outpost. I'm Alex Webster, and to my left I have another member of the Outpost team, James Clancy, and to my right, a musician to talk to us about the intersection of music, politics, and many other things beside, the brilliant Winston Marshall. Winston, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Alex, and James.
So Glastonbury just happened last week, didn't it? And that's why we've moved to record this quite quickly afterwards, because there's been some embarrassment, if I could put it that way. But before we get on to what happened last Glastonbury, Winston, what's it like playing the Pyramid stage?
Well, when I played, and this is a long time ago, this is back in 2013, Glastonbury was a music festival, which obviously is quite a different thing now. Some of your audience might not even realise it was once a music festival, given what we've seen this weekend. And when I played, in fact, this year is the 20-year anniversary from when I first went to Glastonbury. And I remember I was a teenager trying to see as many bands as possible. I think I saw Brian Wilson and White Stripes. I mean, maybe I'm getting years muddled up because I went every year. I was kind of religious about going to Glastonbury. And I had a lot of fun. But playing to be quite honest, we played we headlined the Sunday night in 2013. And by the time it came to the headline set, I'd had so much fun. I can't remember that much about it.
Did you start on the Thursday or the Wednesday?
Oh, always on the Thursday. It's a good question. No, I don't think we got there as early as the Wednesday. Those are the real troopers. There's the people who are there like 3 weeks before. They're just so dedicated, sleeping in the kind of skeleton version of the Pyramid stage, which is there all year round. But what we've seen this weekend is kind of unrecognisable to what I remember then. You know, it was always a bit political. There was always a kind of lefty present, a stage with maybe Billy Bragg talking about this or that Marxism or whatever big ideas he had. But this time it seems that I mean, I didn't go this year, so perhaps people who actually went say I'm talking bollocks, but all we're seeing through is just unbelievably politicised. I think Corbyn again gave a little introduction saying around here we build bridges, not walls. I mean, it's the biggest wall around any event in the country. It's harder to get into Glastonbury than into the country, quite literally. And not only that, you had there's a left-wing stage where you had literal communists like Ash Sarkar and Hope Not Hate Lot. We're talking. You'd think they'd be anti-establishment, but I think they're you look at the titles of what they're discussing. It was what to do about the far right. Yeah, fight the power. Yeah, it's quite literally a Labour government in power, and you'd think they would care more about those sort of things. And not only do you have sort of Fatboy Slim, who I love, by the way, but doing a kind of fuck Trump type DJ set. But
did he?
He did, and there was some stuff. I saw a video of him kind of going like this, a video of Trump. Everyone going.
See, that's interesting because no one does that. It's really unusual.
It's super original, yeah. And then we see tons of flags, Palestine flags flapping away. And we see the most famous examples are Bob Vylan and Kneecap are the ones who have been hogging all the social media space up. Kneecap, who on stage have said up Hamas, up Hezbollah, prescribed terrorist organisations, although they've also said they never supported those groups. But we should talk about whether or not they are on stage, and it's very complicated, that band, because sometimes they're like, oh, we're just a satirical band, it's not real, and then sometimes they sort of seem to really be quite earnest and mean it. Nevertheless, they are an act, so maybe we should take them as an act. And they are Irish, who don't have a very proud history when it comes to fighting the forces of evil. Maybe we should talk about their neutrality in World War II. But there's also this guy called, or a band, I think, they're called Bob Vylan. And this was the more striking to me for a couple of reasons. He's chanted on stage, the thing that's gone very viral is him saying deaf, deaf to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. And so actually some right-wingers are coming out and saying that's anti-Semitic. Well, that's not what occurred to me when I heard him say that. What occurred to me is, why didn't he say deaf, deaf to Hamas? That because I wouldn't have a problem with him saying deaf, deaf to Hamas. So Hamas are a death cult who have kidnapped, raped, and still hold hostage, I think, about 50 Israelis dead and alive from October 7th, 2023. And they are explicitly genocidal. It's in their charter that they wanted to kill Jews. They are, on top of all things, terrorizing the Gazans. They're torturing the Gazans.
But
you
I
can
get
see
that,
this.
but if
if you're
chanting death to anybody at a music festival just seems to go against everything on which music and festivals are founded upon. It's a sort of the hippie culture. If we think back to Woodstock, love not war, all that counterculture, and yet you suddenly got somebody chanting for the death of an organisation. So I just don't think chanting death to anybody is appropriate.
I don't think so, but I agree that it's when I go to Glastonbury, I don't want politics, not least the politics that's so anti the forces of good. I think I think that Britain is a force for good in the world, and has been historically. They're sort of very much chanting against it. Now, on your point, these people aren't anti-war. They say they're anti-war. They're not. If they're
They just
anti-war,
want one side to win, effectively.
they want their side to win. Now, I'm not. There are some circumstances where I am for war, and the circumstance where the outcome is worse than war. For Israel, for example, when it comes to Iran, it's annihilation. That's worse than war. These people actually probably hold that opinion. They probably think that there are things where they are for war in certain situations, and you can tell that because of their failure to identify Hamas as the problem. The big thing that Bob Vylan, the band, did that actually I found more shocking was talking about. They said, you say they kind of have a song where they're saying, you say you want your country back, fuck you, you cannot have that. It's kind of the refrain.
I think it was "Shut the fuck up." Was the
and it's not, and it's not remotely conciliatory, but it's also it kind of plays to those in Britain who are concerned that there's an invasion happening, and people use that rhetoric. It totally supports the indigenous British who think that in that narrative, because here's a guy who's very much acting like, yeah, we're going to take your country. So it's bizarre his frame of mind on that. I looked into him a little bit. He gave an interview where his hot take on Winston Churchill was he's got some problematic opinions, but people still love him. Not mentioning that he defeated the Nazis, that he stood alone against the Nazis. So these people are historically illiterate. They have no fucking idea what they're talking about. Not the slightest. And I'd also say that I don't know that he necessarily represents... I believe that he's of Jamaican heritage, and I'm not sure he represents the Windrush generation Jamaicans. I just had Sir Trevor Phillips on my show, who wrote a fantastic book about Windrush, and he describes... It was actually last weekend was the Windrush Day. He describes how the Windrush generation really perceived themselves to be British. They were British, and I believe they were British, and they absolutely bought into the heritage of Britain, and I think they added to it. This guy is actually anti-British. This guy is not for Britain. He thinks Britain is bad, and so this is what, for me, typifies the sort of Glastonbury politics. It's anti-British. It's not like they've got a mix of views. It's not like on the politics stage they're going to, we'll have. I think they had someone from the Green Party. I can't remember her name.
The Green Party do all the festivals.
Yeah, do they?
Oh yeah, I mean they're everywhere. Apparently Richard Tice was invited.
Oh, was he to Glasgow?
Yeah, to Glasgow.
He should have gone.
He said he was busy, and I think generally people feel threatened of getting mobbed, and they might well do. But these are very much safe spaces for the left. But as you said, is it led by donkeys or Hope Not Hate had a display with all the people on the right that they hate. So there was the Send Them to Mars display, and on it they had, well, guess who they had on the Send Them to the Mars display?
Was anybody remotely sort of
Trump,
famous?
Musk.
Yep.
Yeah.
But they had J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
But they made her look really good because they had her with the cigar picture and the drink, but in an astronaut's uniform. And I thought, wow,
guess who else they had from Britain on there?
Who do they have? Farage?
Of course they had Farage on there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a sort of... Interestingly, they didn't have Julius Malema on there from the EFF, who sings "Kill the Boer," literally calls for genocide. I don't think they had Ayatollah Khomeini on there.
No, of course not.
So there's a lot of people missing off, but it shows really that if you're going to allow that, it's really started to creep through into the festival, whereby it seems acceptable for almost all artists, if they want to make a name for themselves on social media, to start chanting some sort of slogan, which is popular narrative. Free Palestine was chanted. From the river to the sea was chanted. Indoors, I saw some non-artists I'd never heard of. You may have heard of us chanting "Fuck Reform." So this is anti-reform, anti-Farage gets a cheer. And the only guy that did stand up and say something completely different was on the Sunday night.
Rod Stewart.
Yeah, but okay. So let's get this accurate, right? So I don't think Sir Rod said on stage anything about Farage. He had previously said, and I think also, if I'm not mistaken, he'd supported Starmer at the last election, but he said, we've got to give Farage a go. He didn't say that on stage. He kept it to the music. There were some people, there's a guy who was a famous comedian in the 90s called Dom Jolly. He had Trigger Happy TV, which was great. I don't know if he's done anything since, but he was, I did see him pop up because he said he was going to boycott watching Sir Rod Stewart because of him saying that.
Oh, adventurous.
It's like, wow, it's like so much for like being open, like diversity of thought, so much for being accepting of all different types of people. No, that's the kind of attitude. Like, we're not going to watch Rod Stewart because he once said something I politically don't agree with. Like, it's nuts. But actually, the most telling incident at Glastonbury was the lead singer of the 1975, Matt Healy. They were the Friday night headliners, and he gave this very sort of stammering statement on stage, very apologetic about why he wasn't going to do any politics in his set. What? Why are you making statements about not doing politics? This is a music festival. You don't need to tell anyone you're not going to do politics. In fact, the people who are doing politics, it's on them to tell us why they're doing politics at the music festival. That completely typifies. And also, if you watch his demeanour when he's so apologetic. I'm sure I've actually met him. He's a perfectly nice bloke. But I don't see why he has to have that attitude. It shows you how far gone Glastonbury's got.
Isn't it a case that, I mean, what struck me about that is that, like you say, he feels he has to mention he's not doing politics. Maybe that's because I think Taylor Swift came under fire a few years ago for being apolitical.
I mean, she's not apolitical.
Well, she's had to vote. Well, because obviously her PR people have been in touch and said you have to be a bit political these days. But I
don't think that's the case. I think she chose to be.
Oh,
political.
really?
Yeah.
Okay. well, maybe I'm being very uncharitable there about her motivations, but what strikes me is that the change is, so if you take an artist like Bob Dylan, to me, I've never heard of them, but to me they're indistinguishable from early Rage Against the Machine, like indistinguishable in terms of sound, lyrical content, look.
I think that's really unfair. Rage Against the Machine are absolutely incredible.
Okay, but
musically superb, completely compelling. The records are just as good as rock music gets.
I loved all their
Bob Dylan,
albums.
there is nothing musically redeeming about it. It's crap.
It's a derivative. Okay,
it's a copy.
Let's put it.
It's not even a copy.
It's derivative, right? We can say that.
Even that's offensive to Rage Against the Machine. It's so poor.
But what I'm saying is that Bob Dylan could have been making that music in 1993, the same year that Rage's first album came out. But in 1993, it would be inconceivable that you'd have a band on Glastonbury who could have come out in 1961, which was 32 years back from then. That's 1993 years back from us. There's nothing new about them. Nothing. Like this movement to me, it seems moribund. It seems dead. These seem like yesterday's people.
You mean musically? There's nothing new.
Musically, there's nothing new. Politically, there's nothing new. I mean, what they don't realise is, when they say you want your country back, shut the F up. That's literally the hard edge of what Lambeth Council could be doing in their DI discussions. It is the regime. There's nothing new there. Yeah. There's nothing rebellious about it. I mean, he's got in trouble because he poked Israel and the IDF, and I heard just coming in he's been dropped by a talent agency. But had he not mentioned that and just stuck with you say what your country back, nothing would happen to him. And so to me that's where the fashion is now. The fashion's become political because artists. So music has become political because artists can't do anything new musically.
Well, look, the thing about Bob Dylan, I looked into their streaming numbers. Even my niche techno fusion album from 2017 that no one's heard about has higher streaming numbers than Bob Dylan. I don't think anyone actually listens to them. Now, it might be the case that they have a live following or whatever, and they're kind of sort of attempting to be subversive or whatever is the case. But it seems to me they're a bit of a DEI band, like to begin with. Like they're kind of getting it because they're saying something a little bit contro. But I think you're right in that their ideas are establishment ideas. Are they anti-colonialist or decolonialist? It's not exactly clear. It's almost like they are colonialists, but in reverse colonialists. But the establishment, and this is best, we discussed this when you came on my show, James. It's Philippe Sands, who is a British international lawyer who represented not even the Chagosians, the Mauritians in the Chagos deal, and has openly been taped saying how much sort of pleasure he takes in working against the British in this in trying to decolonize. And if you read his book, The Last Colony, which is specifically about Chagos, he's explicit in that it's anti-British. It's about decolonization. That's the irony. So in a sense, and this is I think the point you're making. So a band like Bob Dylan are establishment thought. Like they're quite literally they're adjacent to the establishment thought. Now, Kneecap will say like fuck Keir Starmer, and that's like their show. But it's not, and that's fair enough. Like on the veneer is that they're anti-Labour government or whatever. But if you actually look at the ideas, if you actually look at what they represent, it's pretty adjacent to how the ideas that have been filtered and the politicians of Westminster are marinating in.
I just find the irony of Kneecap themselves. So, well, let's circle back to how the Bob Dylan thing really happened. So the BBC had decided to record Kneecap because they realised it had been criticised and they were worried about what they might say and what stunts they may pull. And so they recorded Kneecap ready to show later, and then they put Bob Dylan, I think it was live, or if it wasn't live, he was certainly the act on the Westholt stage before Kneecap. And so whatever producers made the decision, they had the opportunity to switch to somebody else. They could have gone to a presenter, but they clearly saw his act at the beginning and thought, well, this is all fine, whatever he's chanted, and let the entire act play out.
Yeah, but the assumption in that statement is that whoever it is at the BBC has a clue what's going on. These aren't the best and brightest of Britain that are working on like they're just doing their job. And they might be good at that specific job, but they're like, oh, we've got to show this episode here. There's not a producer who's checking there might be someone whose job is to like check everything, but they're not actually checking everything that's going on. So this filtered through the gap.
Yeah.
No one had heard of Bob Dylan before this weekend.
It's interesting when you get an abusive guest call into like LBC, they'll just get cut. But if you call for death, you seem to get massive attention. Now, this probably isn't going to be bad.
But that's because the people who are running it, the people who are running LBC are at least vaguely understand they're in the idea space. The people who are running Glastonbury, it's supposed to be a music festival. They don't understand politics. They don't know why it's wrong to say deaf to the IDF. And so they're not thinking like you're thinking, James.
I just find, so Kneecap. My point about Kneecap is that they've come up with a name, Kneecap, which is based on what the IRA loyalists would do as for punishment beatings to people within their own community.
Did you serve in Ireland?
No, I didn't serve in Northern Ireland. But kneecapping is the process of shooting someone or putting a knife through the back or front of someone's knee to take out their joints, and it's quite often they kneecap the knee, the ankles, and the elbow. Doing all six was known as a six-pack. But what's interesting is that Hamas have started kneecapping their own people who they want to keep in order, or people that they believe have been stealing supplies of food, who could be informants. So Hamas have adopted some of the same terrorist practices as the IRA. So they've chosen a name that's...
The IRA were doing it to Catholics.
They were doing it to Catholics, yeah.
So the Hamas are doing it to Gazans. It's exactly
it's very rarely done to British soldiers. This was punishment beatings for their own people. And I just find it very strange to celebrate a punishment beating by a terrorist organisation, and then deliberately wear the balaclava, which is a nod to the IRA. So, essentially they're saying that they are promoting the means of which the IRA operated.
Isn't that the point though? Because, for whatever reason, they're at the front of the newspaper. They're the talk of social media.
It's good marketing.
It's not for their music. I've tried listening to it. It is not for their music. There is nothing going on there that is remotely interesting.
I quite like their music.
Oh,
is that my controversial opinion of the day?
So if you were at Glastonbury, would you have gone and seen them?
I probably would have, yeah.
I would have out of curiosity.
I would have out to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe everyone who was there was just there out of curiosity.
But what they didn't show, and the media's not picking up, apparently I've seen social media clips of people singing God Save the King back at them.
Really?
Yeah, there's all sorts of... but I mean, look at this. It's probably the most middle-class white gathering you'll see in Britain these days. So that there were pockets of resistance there, and one of the pockets was singing back at Nika, God Save the King. So look, even though they had a huge crowd...
I'll see it I'll believe it when I see it.
A lot of
maybe
curiosity.
that's true, because on the Led by Donkeys mural, the J.K. Rowling picture was covered in stickers saying "We love J.K."
Really?
Women are not human female. So.
And there was one person who carried a flag with the yellow ribbon representing the hostages still in Gaza, and the Jewish Chronicle reported on that. And I thought it was very sweet. Yeah. You can see the ocean of Palestine.
This is why I like Ibiza. You don't get any of this nonsense. The DJs don't speak. No one speaks. You just get into the club, and everyone shuts up and gets on with it.
Of course, you're an Ibiza lad.
That makes a lot of sense. Old school trance. It's the 25th anniversary of God's Kitchen at Cream. Amnesia this year in September.
Are you going?
Yeah, I'm definitely going. There's going to be no political nonsense. Everyone gets in, shuts up.
I'd be surprised. I bet there is. I bet you there is. I went to the Bilbao for the football, United versus Tottenham, Europa League final. All over Bilbao, there are Palestine flags.
Okay. But that's the same.
And I was like, wow, the Spanish have forgotten their own history here. They've forgotten about Al-Andalusia,
So how does this compare, these political statements being made, to sort of the counterculture around Woodstock 1979? To think back to Jimi Hendrix playing Star Spangled Banner on a Monday morning. I actually read it wasn't to the biggest crowd, but the impact it's had has been historic. It defined a generation of music. It defined the end of the Vietnam era.
Yeah, I mean, there's also... I'm not necessarily against music and politics mixing. It's... you mentioned Rage Against the Machine earlier. They were highly... Their politics, of course, are abhorrent. They're communist. It's the most evil ideology that Europe's ever come up with.
They did have some bangers.
They had some bangers. And they were earnest. I'm not in principle against politics and music mix. I'm not sure if it did at Woodstock, but was it Bob Seger? He was also a communist, and he used to host these boat trips up and down the Hudson where he had environmentalists giving lectures and scientists as well as poets and artists. And there's a time and place where it's kind of nourishing. The thing that's so terrible about Glastonbury is that you cannot not talk politics. You have to give statements if you don't want to talk politics now. You can't, if you have dared utter anything against the acceptable progressive narrative, people will publicly come out and feel like they have to denounce you.
But is it all like that? Because I actually saw a stage, so there's a mini stage, and there is some bloke who became famous during lockdown for singing nursery rhymes. And there must be 2,000 adults sat round singing Wheels on the Bus and Shine, Jesus, Shine. And it's become really, really popular, got a huge following. And he just sings to children, sort of what you'd hear at Sunday.
I'm learning a lot about your musical taste today, James.
What?
That's right. Nursery rhymes and trance.
It came on, and I called my 4-year-old in and was like, well, there's something like vaguely appropriate on at Glastonbury. But I was watching it out of Glastonbury out of curiosity because I've got mates there. But they tend to do the night stuff. And I was also just to see what the headlines are like, because the one I've only been once to Glastonbury. When I went, Metallica headlined, and they also made a political statement. They had pre-made a film of them dressed as foxes ambushing fox hunters, and so they had them pulling off these fox suits and there of guns and blasting men in red tunics. And that creates, there's a big cheer. Of course, you're in the heart of Somerset, in the heart of the countryside, Glastonbury, with the rolling hills in the background where people hunt. And so they were making a very political, anti-hunting stance, or putting that point of view across. It went down very well. And then they got on with their Metallica set, which is just obviously some of the most epic music people have ever heard.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know, that would be different to someone like Bob Dylan, in that I think with Dylan, that band are buoyed by a spirit that animates Britain at the moment. And I think Metallica doing something about fox hunting, sure, some people cared about it, but it was never something that really like drove people, like impassioned them. I mean, there are obviously some nutters who it did, but and by the way, we should bring back fox hunting, but that's a separate conversation. But you know, Bob Dylan, I think that the spirit that animates this is like, fuck you, fuck any of you indigenous British people, for how dare you care about the land that, you know, this place, we're going to take it off you. That's a really popular sentiment that's held. That's the progressive sentiment.
And you hear it more if you hear anyone complaining about immigration or the change of demographics in cities. One thing people fire back straight with is, well, you colonize the world. It's that this is punishment. It's seen as
payback
righteous
time.
It's seen as payback, and that's essentially his argument.
Yeah, that is, I think, his argument, and he'll reference. And look, there were bad things in our history, of course. No one's denying that. But the British, and this is why actually Bob Dylan is offensive, particularly if you take in mind what he said about Churchill and everything else. Our ancestors fought and died for him to be free in Britain today. The freedoms he enjoys, to be able to go and say that stuff at Glastonbury, is because of what our forefathers had died for. So he should pay some damn respect for that. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't also acknowledge what bad things British did. Yeah, we should. But you should recognize as well that we have done we have maybe been, I would say, the greatest nation in history. We've defeated the slave trade. We defeated Napoleon. We defeated Hitler. We've got a... If any nation has a proud history, it's us.
I'd be interested to see what would happen if someone stood up in Glastonbury and said that. I mean, it almost strikes me as that would be a truly subversive thing
Right
to
now,
say.
that'd be subversive, absolutely.
Well, I mean, if we could actually go...
Or counter narrative.
Go back to your career, because, you know, obviously you got big, you got massive, and but you did mix music and politics, as far as I know.
Did I?
I never saw that.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it didn't, yeah.
But actually, funnily enough, now you're actually known kind of as a political figure and a commentator, and you talk mostly on politics. And, you know, so in the ultimate act of sort of rock and roll, you were cancelled for, what was it, liking a book, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, how did that, if you want to go there, I'd be interested, how did that play out? Because there's an interesting sort of theme here about the music industry, as part of all of the creative arts, sees itself as rebellious. They see, as many people see art as having intrinsically a kind of rebellious attitude to it, or at least running through all the different art forms. And yet you did something that really did set yourself apart from the crowd, and you paid the price for that.
I would say just that my band were actually political. I wasn't, but on stage several times they would say "fuck Trump" or "Trump's a cunt," and you can find that stuff. It's online. And they made, we played at the Obama White House. That wasn't necessarily I'm not a fan of Obama. I was at the time, and I guess that would probably be interpreted as an endorsement, but not necessarily. So I did recommend a book. I recommended a book by Andy No, documenting far left extremism and criticising the BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, which it turned out a holy cow in the music industry. I would also say that my band publicly supported that movement beforehand. So yes, the band were to some extent political. So it's, again, here's the difference. I don't actually mind when bands are political. It's when they do it on stage. Mm-hmm. And there are caveats, so I'll go into the caveats. But for me, the stage is about transcendence. And why I never wanted my band to be political on stage, although that was not a battle I won, was that I think when you're engaging with the transcendent, it's one part of the brain. And when you engage with the political, it's the opposite part. And it's actually detrimental to the experience. Now, there are caveats to that, which is, I think, Rage Against the Machine, it's part and package of what they're about. I actually think Kneecap is part and package of what they're about. I would never advocate either for censoring Kneecap, nor would I advocate for them to try and write music that's not political. I get that's the shtick, that's the act. Go for it. And there is a time and place for politics in music, and it's not all music. And our music wasn't political. So, or at least not as far as I knew it was political. But I think when it comes to the stage, if Rod Stewart said that about Farage on stage, I'd have criticised Rod Stewart, but he didn't. He said it somewhere else. He can say whatever he wants somewhere else. I think it's actually great when people engage in society. Another problem you get with musicians is because, and this is even worse with actors and actresses, because they're very famous in one domain, they then feel that they have this platform that they have to say all these things, when actually, not all of them, there's some very bright people, but there's not that many. Or there's some people who are very bright and intelligent when it comes to music, but if you actually had to have a deep philosophical conversation with them, it wouldn't last very long. If you're into ideas, music, the world of music isn't necessarily the best place to get those ideas out. Anyway, so a lot of people, they become very famous in one domain, and then they think they need to talk about it. Now, Kneecap, they become famous talking about Irish Republican stuff. So yeah, they should. It was kind of weird if they didn't talk about that stuff. go for it. I say all this to say that I think it's complicated. It's not so simple. There's no black and white. There's no like it should be one way or the other. It's different for every act. But I do think it's the case that on stage, if you're Prince or you're Bowie and you're really, people are losing this, or you're James's favourite trance act at Creamfields in Ibiza, if you're off your nut on pingers, as I'm sure you will be, James, and then suddenly someone starts banging on about, I don't know what, Trump,
a conflict.
Yeah, you're going to be like, ooh, and it's going to spoil your trip, isn't it? It's going.
You tell me, Winston. You tell me.
I'm sober, so I don't know, but I'm just.
Tell us more about your 2013 Glastonbury trip. But cancel culture coming. Would you say you've been cancelled?
Well, technically,
where it ended your career?
I quit the band, so
could
it was
you
a
have
choice.
On?
Huh?
Could you have stayed on?
I staying on meant that. I mean, I was invited to stay, but I had to issue an apology, and I would have had to stand by that apology, which ultimately was very embarrassing for me because it just wasn't true. I do think Antifa are bad. I do think BLM are bad, and I do think Andy Ngo is a brave guy. I could give all the details, but it's too long a story, I guess, to tell right now. But and then I would have had to go along with these progressive starts and nod along, and that would have been so bad for my soul. And then for two obvious ways it would have been bad. One is that when you're making music, you can't be filtered. If you're filtering yourself about like things you can talk about, not talk about, then when you pick up the instrument, you're going to be filtering yourself there. It's because you're closing yourself up. So it's this psychological damage is terrible. It's no way to live a life. It's to self-censor. You have to. Doesn't mean you should be tactless about it. You should be smart about it, but you should feel like you can express yourself, especially if you're an artist. Like self-expression is the sine qua non of being an artist.
So
that's one aspect, and the other aspect is that if I had to live a life where I was, by the way, I know people in the music industry who are doing this, and it's not going to go well for them, I don't think. But if you pretending to be someone, then the people you end up surrounding you aren't going to love you for you, whether it's your wife or your husband or your friends. Like they're going to think you're someone else. You got to be yourself. So it's just a terrible way to live your life, to go along with this crap. You have to say what you think.
Do you miss it? Do you miss being in the band?
I still play. I mean, I was, I think it's coming out tonight, but Kill Tony is an American comedy show. It's actually the #1 comedy show. And they did the O2 3 weeks ago, the day before I went to Israel and ended up in a war zone. My life is fucking nuts. But so I played the O2 as the band, with the band. I put the band together for Tony Hinchcliffe and we did that. And then a couple of months before that, I played with Oliver Anthony, he's somewhat political. He's not like party political. He's not for a party, but he deals with issues of... he sings in the same way that Woody Guthrie or Bruce Springsteen talk about the issues of people and the troubles of people, and so that inevitably gets into...
It's a very interesting separation, actually, that early Dylan, Guthrie, as you mentioned, Pete Seeger, these were... It was almost kind of aspirational politics. It was about values, rather than this political personality or this group of people. There's something more interesting about that kind of songwriting. That Dave Gilmour said, which really appealed to me. He said, "Oh, gosh, it could have been Roger Waters. I forget." But he said, the only thing that counts with any kind of art, but especially music, is if it moves you.
Correct.
And one way to do that is through, political values. I mean, Orwell was very frank about he needed to be a political writer because that was his way of moving people. That's what animated him. That's what gave him passion. Mm-hmm. Whereas I suppose the difference that you're getting now with the Bob Villans, now I don't want to accuse him of not having passion. He's out there jumping around the stage.
I'm sure he believes what he says.
But it just seems to me more of a kind of, more fashion than passion.
So I think he means it. I think it's quite earnest. I think it's just lucky that it is fashionable to say that right now.
It just doesn't seem to be...
Well, it's so fashionable that he's not being challenged on it. He would have heard it. He would have bought into it. and regurgitated it, and no one said to him along the way why it's wrong. And I guarantee you, he's not bothered to look into what is the argument against him. No way he has. Otherwise he couldn't have possibly come out and said that Churchill said some problematic things, but people love him anyway. Why do you think they love him, buddy?
I mean, to differentiate, I mean, you take someone like Kneecap, perhaps they're just following a very well-trodden path of Come Out Your Black and Tans, Christy Moore. And there's quite a few of these kind of quite passionate Republican Irish singer-songwriters. They just have a techno backbeat, right? It's a tradition, and they've just kind of brought it to the 21st century.
Yeah, I think so. I think there is a tradition.
So, Bob Vylan, should it be cancelled now?
I don't think it should be cancelled. I think that we need to see these ideas. I think it's a good thing that they're on display, because then we can see what we're up against. We can see the evil forces in our country, and we can challenge them in the realm of ideas and in the realm of politics. And I think there's evidence. Britain's in a pretty fucking bad way right now, but there's evidence. Let's say if you look to America, that the idiotic, paper-thin ideas of wokeism were pretty brutally defeated. Now it's coming back in America, and we're seeing it for this New York Democratic nominee for the mayor, who is full woke. I mean, it's like the whole package: Palestine, socialized groceries. It's actually almost comic. It's comic. It would be funny if it wasn't so fucking sad. But nevertheless, there was progress in America in defeating those ideas. And this stuff out, we can talk about it and we can explain why it's so obviously ridiculous.
I mean, he's just. I mean, I keep going back to this issue of, is this new? I mean, he's kind of Corbyn, right? Is there much difference between the two? He's Corbyn with a better social media game and a very good social media game.
Corbyn has a very good social media game. Yeah. Corbyn's very popular. How many votes did he have in 2019? I think he certainly had more than Keir Starmer got in 2024. That there is a spirit of that in Britain. That these people don't exist. Like they're not the ones doing. I mean, they are, I think, saying terrible things, but they're only successful because those feelings are widely held. It's like, obviously Hitler was evil, but the reality is if those ideas weren't there in Germany, if those sentiments weren't felt, he wouldn't have got where he got. In some sense, these people ride waves that exist, ride spirits that animate a country. Well, and they can add fire they can add timber to the fire and exacerbate the flames, and they are doing that. But there's also, they're not coming out of nowhere.
Well, that's very interesting, because could you imagine? I mean, you mentioned Oliver Anthony. I suppose one of the few who's doing it, but a kind of animating musical protest movement, or even just artists coming from the right in the way that these other guys come from the left. I mean, maybe Morrissey sort of drops the odd lyric here and there. I think Clapton said "send them all back" on stage when he was trying out on heroin in the mid-70s. But I mean, does it work in the same way, or does sort of music and politics? Does it have to come from the left, or is this just where the industry is, or is there something about, seeming to come from the common people? I mean, I would argue that right-wing politics is the politics of the common people, but it seems to be so heavily slanted in one way. Is that a reflection of the background of musicians and their political beliefs, or is it something about the nature of popular music?
I don't believe that music is intrinsically left-wing. I think that that's a fallacy. I think that people think it is because we hear a lot of left, and not just music, the creative industries. We think that they're very left. I think you can look through time. There's plenty of right-wing artists. There were artists that supported the fascists in Germany. There's artists that supported the Nazis, and there are there's plenty of occasion, and as we're seeing today, obviously not remotely Nazi or fascist, but Oliver Anthony, although Oliver Anthony will criticize both the Democrats and the Republicans and does so explicitly, and he's not party political, but his worldview probably fits with the current right in America. But the right in America is not even necessarily conservative in any traditional sense, because it's got all sorts of old Democrat lefties in there, like Kennedy lefties. But so it kind of gets complicated. But I think it is a fallacy that music is left wing. The best way to understand it is the psychology of the artist. So if you look at studies done by Jonathan Haidt in his moral foundations theory, which I think is explored in The Righteous Mind, but also Big Five personality tests, whatever the different psychological personality test theories you get into, almost always high trait openness correlates to being political. Sorry, being liberal, being progressive. Although I would say what we're seeing now is not liberalism. It's progressive and liberalisms are antithetical to each other. The progressive seems to dominate the discourse, but there is a tendency for people who are artistic to have high trait openness, and that's correlates to their politics. But what's strange about it is that, as I say, progressivism is actually not open, as we've explored in this conversation. They're incredibly authoritarian. Just take the example of boycotting Rod Stewart just because he had the wrong opinion. So it's not that's the strange thing, is actually these people aren't totally correlated to that. And my theory on that is that, so for example, my show, which has a mixture of voices, right and left, but will give airtime to conservative and right-wing opinions. I know that people in the music industry are watching because they'll privately message me. I'm not going to say who they are, but I'm talking major pop stars, heads of labels, management, who are household names, some of them. And I know they're listening, watching, they tell me, and that's great. But they don't, firstly, they tend to be a bit older. Secondly, they're not actually particularly outspoken about their politics. What you actually have is the 18 to 25-year-olds who are probably the biggest earners in music anyway. They're the ones with selling the most records, or 18 to 30 maybe, and they are highly politicized, indoctrinated in progressive ideology, which is all the things we've discussed in this conversation: Anglophobic, anti-British, anti-Israel, I would say in large part anti-Semitic, they anti-Western, they are free trade. I say free trade instead of capitalist, because I think capitalist is a dirty word that they'll use. They'll say they're anti-capitalist. They're explicitly anti-capitalist. They are pro-Marx. They'll say they're woke. They are against all the things that this country, the values of this country, and so I think that's because they've been indoctrinated somewhere along the way.
And that the interesting problem the BBC now has is that they have broadcast Rob Villain. The government is this afternoon going to give a statement about it, which is essentially unprecedented, that a music festival has now got the government involved in it. This is only going to hasten the calls for defunding the BBC. There are calls for the heads to roll at the BBC. It's filling the airwaves. It's filling the news column. So I think this story is going to keep going this week. My final question to you, Winston, is if the Eavis family or their booking agents ring you up and said, Winston, would you like to come do an act on stage at Glastonbury next year, would you do it?
I would have to hire quite good security, I think.
Why don't we all go? No, I don't think you would, though.
I think I would do it. I would be nervous to be at Glastonbury, because I think these people, they make their murals. I think they mean it. I think they're very angry. I think that they wouldn't have a problem with violence if they
We've
actually.
seen it a little bit when Comedy Unleashed tried to put a show on at the Edinburgh Fringe, and then venue after venue, I think 3 venues cancelled on them, and they ended up having to do it on the street outside the Scottish Parliament. So it says something about the intolerance, lack of...
But we're talking about, this is a subset of society. I mean, it's a big one, but it's not normal people. Like the way I say I'd be nervous at Glastonbury, but I get stopped in the street all the time with positive people saying lovely things about the work I'm currently doing. And as I said, a lot of artists and label heads and management are listening to the show and being super positive.
Yeah.
It's not actually them I'm worried about. It's the very angry, who are probably a minority, but who knows, and they are overrepresented at Glastonbury, obviously.
Do you get negativity on the street ever?
I've only ever once had one person say something, and then as soon as I questioned him, his kind of argument fell apart, and he kind of embarrassingly walked off.
Well, I think you should do it. If you get,
I don't think I'm being invited.
Yeah, well, let's see. Let's see after this if you get the call.
Well, Emily and Michael, I know you're viewers, so
Yeah. Sir Michael.
Waiting the invitation. Sir Michael, sorry. Still adhering to the odds, the establishment. Didn't turn that one down, did he?
Yeah, exactly. And she's inherited the business, which I haven't got a problem with that, but
In trust, so no inheritance tax on the farm.
Right, there you go. So
good old Corbyn socialist, eh? Look, really, thank you for coming in short notice. Given that,
what your audience don't know is it's so
it was
freaking hot.
it was only yesterday that the chaos ensued at Glastonbury, and I think we're going to hear about it all week.
We might. We'll see what happens with Mr. Villain.
So thanks so much for coming on. Obviously, it's a brand new show, kind of rushed into production because arts and music and politics was in the news. And even though I said to James many times we're not a news organisation, here we are. So definitely we're going to do a lot more of these shows. I'm really looking forward to doing this. I'm going to be the one leading it. There might be relief presenters here and there, whatever, but we kind of want to plough a sort of slightly different furrow in the kind of usual political discussion that you get so much. So please, like, subscribe, push all the buttons, whatever, and hope to see you later. Thank you so much, Winston.
Thanks for having me, lads.
Thank you, Winston.
Cut.